The following lesson is linked to Learning Outcome 2, Reading and Viewing. It addresses the assessment standard that requires learners to be able to explain dramatic structure and stage directions. This isn't a science lesson, but have a look at this experiment.
Here we have two substances. Then we mix them together. You can see nothing much is happening. Then we add a third substance. Something is definitely starting to happen. And then eventually, bang! Things are now starting to calm down. But things will never be the same again.
Life and stories about life are a lot like the experiment that we have just seen. The story is introduced, we meet the characters and find out about the context. Then there is their development. Perhaps things start going wrong. The situation becomes more and more tense, people become frustrated and desperate, and eventually there's a dramatic event or climax. The climax may be something good or it may be something bad. But when it occurs, it relieves the tension that has been building and it changes the lives of the people who are involved. Things eventually calm down again and the issues may be resolved, but life is never the same as it was at the start of the story or before the dramatic event occurred. In this lesson, we will learn more about the way that plays are structured to introduce situations, build up tension, include a climax, and finally resolve and conclude the events that have taken place. As in previous lessons, we'll be using James Ngobo's play, The Suitcase, as an example. But remember that the general principles about plot and dramatic structure can be applied to any play that you might watch or study. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain the terms climax and dénouement, discuss the dramatic structure of a play in terms of the introduction, development, climax, and dénouement, explain how cause and effect lead to the climax of a play. In our previous lesson, we learned that a playwright condenses the events that occur over a long period of time into a short period of time, and that everything in a play happens for a reason. The events in a play also need to be carefully ordered to get the audience interested in the story and to show how certain events lead to or cause other events. This ordering of events is known as dramatic structure. As an example of dramatic structure, let's have a look at how the story of Namhla and Dimi is told in the play, The Suitcase. We'll begin with how their story is introduced. Dimi and Namhla's story begins when they arrive in the city and find a place to stay. They are young, naive, and in love. They believe that the city is an exciting place to be, that Dimi will find work easily, and that their love will be strong enough to survive whatever comes their way. The purpose of this opening is to introduce the characters and their environment, which are in a state of equilibrium, to the audience. By a state of equilibrium, we mean that nothing too exciting is happening. Namhla and Dimi are simply newlyweds in Durban who are minding their own business. It also gives the audience a sense of context as we see what Mkhombane was like in the 1950s. By the end of this introduction, the characters and setting have been established and the audience is now ready for the plot to develop. The development occurs when something happens to make the lives of the characters more difficult, forcing a character to take action to try to regain the state of equilibrium. Another way to think of the development is as the steps that lead up to or cause the crisis. From what you know of the story of The Suitcase, can you think of what complications and difficulties Namhla and Dimi have to face? In The Suitcase, the story develops as Dimi starts looking for work. In the beginning, both he and Namhla are hopeful. But as the weeks and months go by, their situation becomes more and more desperate and stressful. As the tension builds, they both lose their innocence about how wonderful life in the city would be, where their love would be enough to help them overcome any hardship. Their worries are compounded when Namhla becomes pregnant. Whilst they look forward to having a baby, they realize that they will need even more money to support a child. As their hopes for Timi finding a job start to fade, tension starts to build between these two characters. For example, Namhla is now prepared to look for a job herself, although Timi's pride won't allow her to. Eventually, Timi becomes a desperate man. Finally, he hits rock bottom. Timi and Namhla's lives have become more and more complicated and difficult. Timi is still unemployed, the landlord wants his rent money, they're running out of money, and they have a baby on the way. These events in the development help to create tension. And by this stage in the play, the audience is starting to realize that something has to give, because Timi can't cope with a desperate situation much longer. Timi needs to take some sort of action. He desperately wants to get back to the state of equilibrium he and Namhla shared when they arrived in Durban, and he's prepared to take a chance to achieve this. So, this is the point in the play when the climax happens. The climax is the point of crisis that changes the characters' lives forever. From what you know of the plot of The Suitcase, can you state what the climax is? The climax of this play happens when Timi is on the bus. A suitcase is left next to him and he decides to claim it. We have seen the causes that lead to this event, and stealing the suitcase is the effect they have created. It is at this moment that Timi's world changes. Things will never be the same again. As we mentioned earlier, the climax of a story is not necessarily bad. Timi takes the suitcase because he hopes it will contain something valuable that he can sell and so solve his problems. He is so hopeful that the suitcase contains something good that he lies to other people about the suitcase being his. And he lies about the reason why the initials on the suitcase are not his. But in this case, the climax of the story, taking the suitcase, is not going to lead to a happy ending. Instead, Timi's theft and his lies lead to his ultimate downfall. A policeman chases after Timi and discovers a dead baby in the suitcase. Because of his theft and lies, no one believes Timi when he now says the case is not his and that he knows nothing about how a dead baby came to be inside it. Timi is arrested and dies a short time later in prison. It's not hard to see how this event changes the lives of not just Timi, but the other characters too. Namhla never sees Timi again. Timi's life is over. He dies in prison a broken man, believing that he has failed his wife and unborn child. And even Lovuyo's life is changed forever, as he will grow up without a father. But if the play were to end here, it would leave the audience unsatisfied. We don't want the story to end on such a tragic note, and we still have unanswered questions about what happens to Namhla and the baby. So, after the climax in the play, the loose ends need to be tied up. Although the world of the characters has changed, it reaches a new state of equilibrium. This stage of a story or play is called the Dénouement. The Dénouement is this new state of changed equilibrium in which the characters find themselves. In The Suitcase, all our questions are answered and the loose ends are tied up when Namhla realizes that Timi is not coming home and has died in prison. She abandons her dreams of life in the city and she returns home to the village. When we see Namhla holding baby Lovuyo, we know that she has had the child. And finally, the play ends with Lovuyo going back to the city to retrieve Timi's spirit, to take it back home and back to Namhla. The Dénouement allows us to see how stealing the suitcase leads to or causes a new set of effects. This part of the play also gives us a sense of finality. We know what happens to the characters and we realize that, despite Timi's flaws, Lovuyo now realizes that his father was a good man who had tried to provide for his family. Although we've been looking at the story in The Suitcase, as an example, you will find that dramatic structure and causes leading to effects is present in all plays and in fact in all forms of literature. Most stories begin with an introduction, and then there is a development that leads to a crisis. Issues are then resolved in the dénouement, which leads to the conclusion. When you're reading or watching a story being performed, pay attention to the way that the action and events of the plot are organized along the timeline to create the dramatic structure. Doing this will help you realize how one event or series of events can lead to or cause the next event or series of events. Here is your task for today. Write a paragraph in which you discuss how cause and effect lead to the climax of the play, The Suitcase. In other words, state what events lead to the climax occurring and what this climax or effect is. Please join me for the next lesson when we learn how characters are created and portrayed on stage. See you then.